Hi guys, welcome to the Unit 6 wrap-up, the Great Depression and the New Deal. This was a very short unit, however, it is an extremely important unit. So please make sure you are paying attention and let's dive into 1930s United States. On this title slide, I tried to put a lot of images that really represent what was going on during this time period in America. In the top left corner over here, we have Hoovervilles. These were shanty towns. Remember, Hoovervilles were these little makeshift temporary communities that were formed by homeless people. So think of modern day tent cities for the homeless. This is what Hoovervilles were. People who were homeless tried to build structures out of whatever they could find so they could have shelter. We have in the opposite corner, so the top right corner, we have Franklin D Roosevelt. He is going to be president of the United States throughout the Great Depression. So we're going to have Herbert Hoover first, then we're going to have Franklin D Roosevelt. And Roosevelt's going to be the president for the majority of the 30s and into the 40s. And he is going to try to navigate the United States through the Great Depression. Down here, the second picture on the second row, we have the effects of the Dust Bowl that brought in the great winds of sand and dirt and covered much of the Great Plains. We have a soup line over here for children, but if you look at this bottom row, the second image, this is a soup line for adults. We have people begging for jobs. So the Great Depression, guys, it's called a depression for a reason. This was a really dark period in American history, and a lot of people struggled during this time period. So like I said, super short unit, but extremely important. So please be paying attention. All right, our era summary. This era in U.S. history is defined or characterized by a deep economic depression. This means that our economy is not working to its fullest potential. It is extremely low in its operations, and people are struggling financially because of it. And this economic depression is going to be marked by high unemployment. That means people not having jobs. So unemployment is people not having jobs. So high unemployment. At the time, unemployment is going to reach 25%, which essentially means 1 in 4 Americans, 1 in 4 working Americans don't have a job. To kind of compare, the unemployment rate today is around 6%, I think 6 to 6.5%. So during the Great Depression, it was 4 times the rate that it is now. So economic depression marked by high unemployment. The agriculture sector is going to be devastated by a drought, which is going to bring in the Dust Bowl. And remember, that is in the Great Plains, so the central part of the United States, where the vast majority of the land was used for farms. So in response to this economic crisis of high unemployment, the stock market crash, and the Dust Bowl, the federal government is going to expand its reach, and they're going to create new programs with the New Deal. And some of these programs that still exist today are the Social Security Administration, the FDIC, and the SEC. All right, so let's go and let's break these topics down. All right, so turning point 1929. I very rarely ask you to know dates. However, this is going to be one of the handful of dates that you will be expected to know for U.S. history. 1929. So 1929. And what occurred in 1929? Well, the stock market crashed. And this is going to mark the beginning of the Great Depression. So 1929. Stock market crashed, Great Depression began. And with the crash of the stock market, the United States is going to become economically vulnerable, and this is going to lead to the changing role of the government in domestic economic policy. So we are looking at the government's economic or money policies within the United States. So domestic within the United States, economic dealing with money, trade, industry, tariffs, things of that nature. So domestic economic policy. So what do you need to know about 1929? It was the stock market crash, which started the Great Depression, which is going to change the role of the federal government. All right, so what caused the Great Depression? So there's going to be 4 things that I specifically focus on. The first one is going to be the impact of tariffs on world trade. High tariffs are going to limit foreign trade and investments. So if you look at this image up here on the left, this is kind of a demonstration of how tariffs work. And I think I've used this one in one of the other wrap-ups before. So we have a roll of cloth in the United States that costs $4. We have a roll of cloth coming from Britain, and it costs $4 a roll in Britain. However, there's going to be a 25% tariff or tax put on to this roll of cloth. So that's going to add $1 to it. So this roll of cloth in the United States, instead of costing $4, is going to cost $5. And the reason this was done is because when Americans go and they look at the $4 cloth, which is American made, or the $5 cloth, which is British made, they're going to be more inclined to buy the American made product because it is cheaper. So these tariffs are going to limit foreign trade and investments. And this is going to become a barrier to European countries who are repaying their debts that they owed us from our assistance in World War I. So if these countries are sending goods to the United States for people to buy in order to make money, but there's a tariff and they can't make as much money as they once were, they're going to have a hard time paying back their loans. So this impact of tariffs on world trade is going to prevent other countries from paying back what they owe us from World War I. All right, the second cause is going to be stock market speculation. So this is when people began buying stocks on margin. So they needed only 10% of the price of the stock to buy it. And then they would get a loan from the banks and they would pay off the loan. And this is going to lead to widespread speculation or over speculation. And this occurs when investors buy shares of stock in a company for the sole purpose of buying them once they increase in value. So this is going to lead to falsely high stock prices. So remember, this is that actual value versus intrinsic value. So think of that Babe Ruth baseball card. The card itself, the actual physical card, is probably worth about $2. Remember, it's just a piece of cardstock with some ink and lamination. But the fact that it's a Babe Ruth rookie card, our value that we as people put on it is hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the actual value and the intrinsic value, the value that we as people put on it, are 2 different things. And that's what we're going to see happen with these stocks. Their actual value is going to be worth, let's say, $10, but people are going to go buy them for $50 in the hopes that they're going to be able to make money back. So if you look at our image here, so on Monday, we're going to buy a pile of gold, and then on Wednesday, we're going to sell the gold and make a pile of money. So this is speculation. You are buying stocks on margin, and you're only paying for like 10% of the price of the stock, taking a loan out from the bank to pay for the rest, but then turning around and selling it really, really quickly. So then you get back the 10% you paid, plus enough to pay your loan off, plus enough to make a profit. So this is going to be extremely dangerous. And like we said in class, this is very similar to gambling, except instead of gambling with some side money, you're gambling with your life fortune, your life savings. All right, our third cause is going to be bank failures. So after the stock market crashed, millions of Americans are going to become scared that the banks would fail. And because of this fear, they're going to start withdrawing their money from the bank. And virtually what's going to happen is overnight, thousands of banks are going to be in danger because people are removing their money. And so the more that Americans took their money out of banks, the more the banks failed. And the more the banks failed, the more money Americans withdrew. So it's this vicious cycle that's just going in a circle. And banks were not secure. The money in them was not insured if the banks failed. And this is going to result in the loss of savings for many, many Americans. So if you look at this chart over on the left, in 1920, 167 banks failed because bank failures was nothing new, okay? It wasn't anything that was unheard of, but it wasn't that common. And this is across the United States. In 1925, we're going to see this number, it's going to go up a lot. We're going to go from 167 to 618. Then we hit 1930. Now remember that turning point year of 1929, the stock market fails. So in 1930, we're going to see this number double. And we're at 1,300 banks closing. And then the very next year, we're at 2,200, almost 2,300 banks. We're going to see a little reprieve in 1932. But when the Depression hits its lowest mark, when the stock market hits its lowest mark in 1933, we're looking at 4,000 banks across the United States closing. Guys, in 13 years, we went from 167 banks closing all the way to 4,000 banks. Now, if you look at 1934, we only have 57 banks closed. Well, that's because a lot of these banks, they don't exist anymore. But then we're also going to have the creation of the FDIC, which we're going to get into here in a few minutes. But bank failures, guys, this was a vicious cycle. So we have 3 causes so far. The first cause we have is the high tariffs and their impact on world trade. The second is speculation and over-speculation of the stock market. Third is bank failures. And then finally, the fourth one is the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve System, or better known as the Fed. And they indirectly set interest rates because they're the ones who loan money to banks. So they set interest rates because they're loaning out money to the banks. And in 1928 and 1929, in an effort to stop speculation, the Fed is going to raise interest rates. However, that is going to have the opposite effect and it is going to hurt the stock market more than had they just left it alone. So we have 4 causes. 1, high tariffs. 2, speculation or over-speculation. 3, bank failures. 4, monetary policy of the Federal Reserve System. If I were you, I would take a quick peek at this image right here, pause the video, check out what's going on in terms of what the Federal Reserve does. All right, so at the exact same time that all of this is going on, the middle part of the country, so the Great Plains, the central part of the United States, is going to have its own crisis. And this crisis is called the Dust Bowl. So remember, like we talked about in class, let's take 2020. In 2020, on one hand, we have COVID, and it has been terrible, and we know how bad it's been. And on the other hand, a completely and totally separate issue, we have had the protests and riots. But when you put these two things together, they have made 2020 a historical year that just seems like there's just so much. And this is going to be the same thing in the 30s. Because on one hand, we're going to have the crash of the stock market and the Great Depression. And on the other hand, we're going to have the Dust Bowl, and put these two things together. And it's just going to make this time period of the 30s that much worse. So let's get into the Dust Bowl. All of these images were taken from the Great Plains during the time of the Dust Bowl. So we're going to be looking at two areas. We're going to be looking at the human factors and we're going to be looking at the physical factors. So, human factors. Farmers had abused the land by overplanting and they weren't rotating their crops. And this is going to cause a depletion of the topsoil. So, you're going to have a ton of soil that's not any good and it's just sitting on top of the land. Because remember, soil has nutrients, right? There's got to be nutrients in there to help the plants. But if they're overusing it and they're not letting it recoup those nutrients, then it's just kind of useless dirt and it's just going to lay on top. And because of this, millions of acres of farmland are going to become useless. And this is going to cause hundreds of thousands of people to migrate away from the region. So they're going to move away from the area, and many of them are going to migrate to California. You know they're not going east because there's a Great Depression going on. The stock market crashed. There's no jobs. So the hope is, let's go west, let's go to California, and hopefully there will be some jobs there. And then the physical factors. This is going to be caused from years of a sustained drought. So several years without rain, and this is going to cause the land to dry up. And then we're going to get great clouds of dust and sand. So remember in class we talked about these were like waves, right? And when you have a wave and there's nothing in front of that wave, it's just going to keep going and it's going to get bigger and it's going to get stronger and it's going to get faster. And then till it hits the shore and then it becomes, it stops because it has met resistance. Well, it's going to be the same thing with this wind. This wind's just going to go and get stronger and get bigger and get faster until it meets resistance. And there was no resistance on the Great Plains because it was vast farmlands. And this is going to create a devastating effect for this region. So if we look at this map of the Dust Bowl and migration routes. So I have two maps. They're both pretty similar. It just depends on which one you prefer. Y'all know I like the black and white one because I think it looks like a giant avocado. But I want y'all to see this central part of the United States that is being impacted by this. So all the way from Texas up to North Dakota and Montana. And then the vast majority of the people who are going to leave are going to head west. They're going to settle primarily in California and into Oregon and some even into Washington. But what you need to know is that during the migration, they are headed west, specifically to California. And then, like I said, also Oregon. But yeah, just know that they're headed west and I'll be happy. All right, so how was the Great Depression, but specifically the Dust Bowl, reflected in our society? So the themes about the troubles of the poor and the misery of life during this time period are going to be reflected in the photography of Dorothea Lange. So here is Dorothea Lange. She is a photographer, and right here are some of the images that she is most known for. You will recognize Migrant Mother. We talked about it in class. This is probably her most famous image. And then we had John Steinbeck, who wrote the novel The Grapes of Wrath, detailing what it was like for migrant workers, following farm to farm to farm. So basically hopping around the United States, going from farm to farm, looking for work. So Steinbeck and Lange are recording the troubles and the struggles and the misery of what life was like for people during this time period. All right, so during this time period, we are going to see mass unemployment, huge numbers of people without jobs. So by 1933, unemployment is going to be at 25%. So like I said, this is 1 in 4 every working age adult. And this is going to lead to food shortages. So we're going to have the development of bread lines and soup lines. So I have an image of one over here in the bottom left corner of the pictures. It's people lining up for a chance to get something to eat. So when you think of bread and soup lines, I want you to think of food lines for the homeless today. So it's charity to feed those who cannot afford to feed themselves. So what we're going to see is the biggest thing that's going to go along with the reasons for unemployment is a demand for consumer goods is going to decline. So if you remember, during the 20s, we're buying things left and right. Like people are, they've just discovered credit and they are buying any and everything they can get their hands on. Then the stock market crash occurs, then the Dust Bowl occurs, and people lose all their money. So they're not trying to buy things anymore. And this is going to see the demand for consumer goods go down or decrease or decline. And because of this, manufacturers, the people who make the stuff, are going to reduce their production. They're not going to be making as much stuff because why would there? Why would they? Nobody wants it. So they're going to reduce their production, which means they don't need as many people as they once did. And so this is going to bring about layoffs or people being fired from their jobs. Unemployment is going to have a big role in migration because unemployed men are going to be traveling the railroads. So I have a picture right here of men on a train. They're going to be jumping on the railroads, going from city to city, looking for economic opportunities. They're looking for work. And then the inability of consumers to make their installment payments is also going to lead to reduced production and even more layoffs. Let's look at our images here. We have protesters demanding work, or at least wages, some type of stimulus to help them. We have men who, this guy at one time, y'all, he was a banker. He was extremely rich. And now he's selling apples on the side of the street for 5 cents a piece. We have men begging, saying, I will do any type of work. Please just give me a job. We have the Hoovervilles here again. This is somebody claiming this plot of land. Here's another Hooverville. We looked at this picture in class. This guy's making his home out of any and everything he could find. Signs like these, jobless men keep going, we can't take care of our own, these were common. Cities couldn't handle it, and they were trying their hardest to take care of people who live there. So they didn't want more people coming in, draining their resources. All right, so like I said, we're going to see a lot of migration. We're going to see people moving into cities and moving from city to city. So all these people from the Great Plains are going to move west, and they're going to move to cities in California. So cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles and San Diego and things like that. So we're going to see urbanization, and this is going to occur as workers migrate into cities in the search of jobs, and the effects that come along with urbanization. So cities are going to become polluted. Waterways, so rivers, canals, lakes are going to become contaminated. Air quality is going to diminish, and then ecosystems are going to be disrupted. We're also going to see urban sprawl. We're going to see the growth of suburbs overtaking surrounding farmlands, and people are going to be settling in animal habitats, and they're going to be causing deforestation so they can tear down these lands to build homes. And we're going to see an increase in infrastructure. So the increased demand for resources, specifically water and energy, is going to result in the building of the dams. So things like the Hoover Dam. We're also going to see an increase in the building of railroads, roads, and infrastructure to meet transportation and communication needs. All right, so one of the saddest things to come out of the Great Depression is the deportation and repatriation of those of Mexican descent. So during the Great Depression, anger towards Mexicans and Mexican American workers is going to become stronger. And the first president during the decade, so we had two presidents during the decade. We had Herbert Hoover, and then we're going to have Franklin D. Roosevelt. So this is Hoover. So Hoover is going to start a program called Real Jobs for Real Americans. And what he means by that is whites, so Caucasians, and that were not immigrants. So Caucasians who were born in America and African Americans who were born in America. And this is going to result in the passage of local laws prohibiting the employment of anyone of Mexican descent, even U.S. citizens. So Mexican and Mexican American workers are going to be laid off. We're going to see an extremely high number of unemployment percentages within this community. And public officials are ultimately going to deport over 1 million Mexican Americans. Even Mexican Americans who were American citizens. So these are people who were born in America, but like maybe their grandparents had immigrated from Mexico, but they're American citizens. They are going to be removed from the country and sent to Mexico. Mexicans are going to be blamed for the economic crisis, and the deportations are going to be justified because of this belief that Mexicans are straining the welfare and charity systems. So deportation, repatriation is the removal of 1 million Mexican Americans from the United States. It is, like I said, probably one of the saddest things to come out of the Great Depression. All right, so another thing Herbert Hoover is going to do is he is going to approve the creation of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, known as the RFC, as a government agency, and their job was to authorize loans to big businesses that had suffered losses as a result of the Great Depression. The agency is going to operate through the Great Depression and the Second World War. Their policies of supporters and opponents of the New Deal is going to advocate for government intervention to protect the economy and private business. So the Reconstruction Finance Corporation is going to be authorizing loans to large businesses, and they are going to advocate for government intervention to protect the economy and private businesses. All right, the New Deal. So Hoover's no longer president. Hoover's gone. Remember, like we talked about it, they called the homeless cities Hoovervilles. Nobody likes Hoover. He is blamed for the Great Depression and blamed for making it worse. So we are going to see the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He is he is one of the most influential presidents of all time, probably the most influential president of the 20th century. So FDR is going to create the New Deal. And New Deal policies were intended to provide the 3 R's: relief, reform, and recovery, by creating worker programs, reforming banking and business practices, and instituting new government programs, and promoting economic recovery. So the 3 R's: relief, reform, recovery. We want to relieve the problems that the people are facing. We want to reform the things that went wrong so this never happens again. And we want to recover and make the economy strong again. Okay, job creation programs. So the New Deal is going to create a lot of programs with the focus on creating jobs. So economic conditions are going to prompt government intervention in the economy. And this is going to increase the power of the government. And the government is going to create jobs by instituting new programs such as the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, Civil Works Administration, CWA, Public Works Administration, PWA, and Works Progress Administration, the WPA. So these programs were focused on creating jobs for the unemployed in the United States. Okay, so New Deal reform agencies, and these three still exist today. We have the FDIC, or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the government. So this is the government insurance of deposit accounts at member banks up to $250,000 per account. And the FDIC continues to provide stability to the banking industry. Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC. So this continues to regulate the stock markets and businesses, ensuring against fraud. So no more speculation or over speculation. And then finally, the SSA, Social Security Administration, continues to provide income to elderly Americans as a retirement and investment. All right, so we did have some opponents of the New Deal. We did have some people who did not like it. So opponents means they opposed it, which means they were against it. Okay, so opponents were the people against it. And the opponents of the New Deal are going to argue that it overregulated business and restricted individual freedoms. The opponents will also argue for the government redistribution of wealth. And this was a plan called Share Our Wealth Plan. And it was pushed by Louisiana Senator Huey Long. So right here we have a picture of Huey Long and then a pen for Share Our Wealth Plan. And this is for looking at the redistribution of wealth. And then we have Francis Townsend, who's over here on the far right. And he is a California doctor who argued for a pension plan that would require those receiving payments to spend the money. His plan is never going to be created. However, it is going to lead to the Social Security Act. So he kind of set the stage, got everything going for the development of the Social Security Administration that we have today. All right, the impact of the New Deal. So passage of the New Deal legislation is going to mark a significant change in the role of the federal government in the lives of the U.S. people. So in response to the conditions of the Great Depression, the Roosevelt administration is going to take on the responsibility of addressing the poor economic conditions, most notably high employment. So Roosevelt is focusing on fixing the unemployment rate. And he's going to create New Deal policies that administer grants to state governments to implement these programs. And the New Deal is going to establish a significant role for government involvement in stabilizing the economy at both the state and federal level. So the impact of the New Deal is a change in the role of the government, and the government is going to increase the amount of power and influence in which they have over the American people. All right. Franklin D. Roosevelt is going to attempt to do what we call court packing. So Roosevelt is going to attempt to increase the number of Supreme Court justices from 9 to 13. And this would have created a shift in the separation of powers and checks and balances. So Roosevelt wanted this increase because much of the New Deal legislation was challenged in courts because there was a concern that the growing power of the federal government interfered with the power of the states. So Franklin Roosevelt's attempt to increase the number of U.S. Supreme Court justices can be viewed as an increase in executive power at the expense of the judicial branch. So we would be taking power away from the judicial branch and putting more in the executive branch. This is going to divide the Democratic Party. Roosevelt was a Democrat. So this is going to divide the Democratic Party, and it's going to slow down his work in passing domestic legislation. FYI, the Supreme Court still only has 9 members. Roosevelt was not successful at getting the increase in the number of justices. And then finally, again, back at our era summary, defined or characterized by deep economic depression, high unemployment. Agriculture sector saw a drought, which caused the Dust Bowl. So in response to this economic crisis, the role of the federal government is going to be expanded with the New Deal programs, which also led to the creation of Social Security, the FDIC, and the SEC. I hope, like always, this helped. Guys, make sure when you walk into class for that test, you are prepared for success. That is the expectation every single day in class, that you are prepared to be successful. Make sure you read your test with thought. Make sure you follow your strategies and do your absolute best. Y'all are amazing. You're going to rock it. Best of luck on your Unit 6 test. You got this. And I will see y'all in the next video. Bye, guys.